the U.S. President Donald Trump, new in the office, gave his first speech to an international crowd. Among all the things he mentioned, China has been occupying a huge chunk. What do you make of the remarks he made? For example, do well with China, deal well with China?
I think that you were exactly right, that he communicated by doing this respect for Davos, for the World Economic Forum, for the leaders that gather here, and he spoke to them in a very professional way, like almost, like a club. Okay, he's come before. He sees what Davos is. So I thought that was interesting. The tone. I think. Secondly, he communicated respect. Third, he communicated his key messages that he's been stating through the campaign and stating afterwards, which is, this is a new golden age for America. Mm-hmm. Decline has ended, rise has begun. America is open for business. We're eager for you, chief executives and businesses, to come and invest and to come and build a factory and to come employ people and to make things in America. And if you do, you're going to be rewarded. And if you don't, you're going to be punished by tariffs. And other countries that have taken advantage of us because we had weak leaders who didn't know what they were doing, that's what he says, are going to have now to have a more level playing field. And then when asked about China, I thought his tone was quite positive. And in the campaign, many times he said, I know President Xi, he's brilliant, a brilliant man. I respect him. We have a good relationship. So they had a phone call. They talked about fentanyl. They talked about trade. But they talked about the war in Ukraine and about ending the war. So I think, and then I particularly found what he said interesting in the light of the fact that Xi called Putin, I don't know, yesterday, the day before. So you, watching the tea leaves here, you can see that he's moving, and he spoke even with some passion as he does about ending the senseless war.
You are predicting 1 or 2 years better relationship between China and the United States with this administration than earlier. Can you help us to understand as to why, and what do you mean by better, in what area?
First, you're going to get an early relationship between the two leaders. And these are not just two leaders. I refer often to President Xi Jinping as the emperor, and I think now we have the American counterpart. So a supreme leader in both cases, each of whom is determined to do things his way, okay? So these two people then have a respect for each other, and that was reflected in this. Then they have some issues that they can work on together.
He earlier threatened about tariffs to many of U.S. trading partners, including those in the neighborhood. And this time he also mentioned about Europeans, China, and also China, together with other Asian economies, as you mentioned, about the so-called trade deficit. So, Professor, what do you make of his approach as a geopolitical expert, and how do you see tariffs has become such a signature?
You should look at the context, okay? And I think in part, tariffs are ammunition for coercing or giving you a competitive advantage in bargaining with another party. And he believes that since there's a bilateral trade deficit with Europe and a bilateral trade deficit with China, he can put on tariffs, and that the counter tariffs will have less impact than they do in the U.S. This will advantage the U.S. So I think these are mostly about bargaining to get the terms of a deal that they want. So I could easily imagine on the Chinese side, so that when they did this big deal at the end of Trump administration, China agreed to buy $200 billion of more products from the U.S. Then came COVID, and it never happened. So if I were writing the script for President Xi, I would say, at the first meeting, I would say, I've looked back at this and I understand that, there was COVID and then there was this guy Biden and, whatever he did. But for you, we agreed that we're going to do this, we'll do it, okay? And so I think they'll bargain about that.
What is your biggest finding?
this is a phenomenon. I mean, this is not like any political leader I've ever seen before. He's got his own combination of strengths. He's unpredictable, erratic sometimes. He likes being. If he hasn't provoked you, he's not happy. Yeah. He thinks if you provoke you and you kind of have chaos, that's good because it's going to precede me being able to enforce a better outcome than otherwise.
How would you describe the early days of Trump 1.0, and Trump 2.0?
Trump 1.0 was here clearly an amateur who had just accidentally got into politics, had no idea how politics worked, but still won. So a very competitive person and a very capable person. And now he's president, but he doesn't know how the government works. And he then appoints as his cabinet people whom he thinks like he's doing central casting, but who have absolutely contrary views from him. And then he's frustrated, okay? So now he experiences all this. He has 4 years to think about it, and he has been. So now you have a president who says to everybody, I am the chief executive. Loyalty is your first requirement. I decide, you execute. If you don't like that, you're going to be fired immediately.
Professor, we see the administration, the makeup of the administration, especially in terms of foreign policy, there are quite a number of what some describe as China hawks.
Traditional China hawks,
yes. So with a president now talking relatively balanced toward China, vis-a-vis future days in working with this many in his administration, how things will turn out?
If it were the previous administration, Trump 1, then you would be sure it's just going to be chaos. Okay? But in Trump 2, I think he has making it absolutely clear. And Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, who's one tough lady, she actually, Trump calls her the the Ice Maiden, the Ice Maiden. So she, you know, if you're doing something contrary to what Trump has decided to do, she calls you up and she says, "You have one more chance, okay?" And so she'll cut your never. She'll smile. She'll be nice. So she's going to be very tough, and I think that all the folks in the administration, and particularly. Let's take Rubio as a very interesting example. The Secretary of State is going to be looking over his shoulder all the time thinking, okay, he's the president. Now, why did he appoint people who have such contrary views? That's another interesting story for somebody to pursue. I mean, that's the mainstream view. The mainstream view in America, both Democratic and Republican, is pretty hawkish, pretty negative about China. So, and especially in the Republican Party. So I think this will be interesting to see how people adjust. But if we look at the early tests, so when people began to, as it became clearer and clearer last summer that Trump had a real chance of winning, people like Rubio or Waltz, who previously would have voted in favor of aid for Ukraine, all of a sudden became against aid for Ukraine. Where did that come from? Come from looking. So I think they're going to be looking to see where he has a strong view. Yeah. They're going to be respectful.
Now, there is talk, according to the media, U.S. media coverage, about Trump likely to make a trip to China around March, something like that. But then how important it is that the two leaders to meet, to talk more in details, and also be able to establish a more comprehensive web of channels of communicating with one another.
If they meet and set the framework, you or I might not like it, but if we work in the system, we're already, in the frame. And so I would say, I think it's quite possible they're going to meet and talk frequently. Now then they need to have, as they talked in the first conversation, a strategic communication link. So in the Biden administration, this was Jake Sullivan and Wang Yi. Who it will be in the Trump, I don't know. It hasn't been settled yet, but that also happened.
Yeah.
Now then in the Biden administration, that then fled out to these various working groups in different arenas. How that's going to work, that'll come after. But I think if the leaders have set the framework, and if then they say, here's some priorities for us. So one, we're going to work together to end the war in Ukraine. Secondly, I think they should have 10 things that they're going to do. I would even, somebody had suggested yesterday, they could say, we're going to develop a new communique about the whole nature of U.S.-China relations. And we're not going to leave them to some committee to do. We're going to do them. They'll do them with a few staff. So they should have like 3-4 things on their agenda. On trade, I think Biden will, or Trump will say, we have to eliminate this deficit. It's not fair. And again, I don't think that's very hard to do. If I were she, I would say, oh no, it's difficult, blah, blah, blah. Yes, okay. TikTok, oh, that's a terrible problem. TikTok is not going to be a problem. TikTok is going to be a deal, so they'll, for Trump's purposes, the more noise about it and the more difficult it seems and whatever, then it's even a bigger thing that I did. But I think that there's a lot of deal space here between the two parties and to Trump's credit, Trump is very clear he wants to be a peacemaker. He's not about war. He doesn't want to have a war with China. She is absolutely clear. War with the U.S. would be catastrophic for everything China wants. So you got two people that have a similar idea. I think it's again, the space for them to work. So I don't want to be Pollyannish, but I'm certainly optimistic. Now, if you told me, can you tell the story how all this went awry? Absolutely, I can. There's many negative downsides, but I'm gonna end with the positive.
We're likely to see more ups and downs in terms of rhetorics, at least, and also the moods and sentiments. So how can we learn the lessons from Trump 1.0 in terms of bilateral relations?
I would say, back to the thing I said before, do not take him literally. Don't take the theater, distracting. Take him seriously, look for the patterns, and expect to be shocked, amused, entertained, but nonetheless, where there's an alignment of interests and where there's a pattern in the commitment, then I would say, be persistent.
You notice that the latest discussion, at least in some academic papers, talking about in Washington and elsewhere, people should look at China with the right proportion in terms of challenge, rather than overblown out of proportion. Do you agree with that? In the past few years, has America, in a way, whether in the academic circle or larger areas, look at China beyond what China really is?
The recognition that China is rising in every dimension and therefore will inevitably be challenging the U.S. is correct, is life. And then there's some people, particularly the China demonizers, that make things to be out, oh my God, China is spying on us. For instance, how shocking. All countries spy on each other.
That's why
China
the TikTokers are joking about we are China's spy.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's been a lot of exaggeration by extreme China hawks, but I don't think that's where Trump is now. If you listen, go look at everything he said for the past year. Every time that he wrote, you won't find any of that.
Professor,
So
always enticing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.